On this episode, I was joined by Jason Etter on the podcast. He is a 20-year marketing pro and generalist who has led marketing teams, freelanced for himself, and he has helped companies clarify their story and messaging. And in this episode, we talked about a couple of things. We talked about the power of storytelling for boring brands. We also talked through the elements that actually make up a great company story. And Jason tells us how he applies these storytelling principles to himself as a freelancer. So we'll talk about that and so much more. Let's dive right into the episode. If you wouldn't mind just giving us the bullet points of your career as a marketer leading up to this point, and then sharing a little bit of what you're working on now.
Yeah, sure. Name is Jason Etter, and I've been in marketing now for, gosh, almost 20 years. And started off actually wanting to be an aspiring playwright of all things, which really started to awaken the excitement I have for storytelling and understanding the narrative. And then that really expanded into when I was directing some of the stage productions I was putting together. I started to see, hey, this one actress, this one actor versus the other, I could give them the same line, and I hear two different interpretations of what that line means. And I really have adapted that awareness into the B2B space in particular, throughout my careers in in IT and different SaaS organizations, and even in my learnings at LaSalle University, getting my first master's degree in information technology, and then my second master's at Rutgers Business School more recently in digital marketing. And then lastly, I just finished the Grow class or certification in growth marketing as well. I'm kind of a sponge for all that stuff. I've spent most of my time unintentionally in the SaaS and IT space. I feel like that those areas are kind of like my comfort zone. I understand the needs, I understand the industries, and what channels in particular that they play in, which again further helps my understanding of how to uncover the narrative for these organizations.
So let's dive right in there. So on the more technical side of things, whether you're working with an IT company, whether you're working with just a plain old SaaS or whoever it is,
Yeah.
I think a lot of the time storytelling does come up as how are we going to do that for this company? We're in a boring industry. We have a product that's
Mm.
just there to serve a specific use case and it's not super sexy or anything. But how do you combat that? And how do you think about stories for companies like
I love that question. And you're absolutely right. So many organizations kind of have that, like, they've sort of just accepted the fact or the fact, and they have this fact, and I use air quotes in that, even though this is audio, saying that, hey, I'm in insurance or I'm an IT managed service provider. How sexy can this get? How exciting can it get? And my immediate response is like, well, if that's the way that you're going to continue to perceive your organization, then that's exactly what you're going to get. Um, However, I have found, and in particular with uh, the IT and SaaS industry, especially, if you spend the time to talk to the people that actually use what it is that you're providing, whether it's a service or an application, widget, whatever it may be, I want to understand how their lives have improved, how it has helped them get that raise, how it has helped them uncover something, and maybe they were able to go to a baseball game with their kids because they didn't have to spend an extra 3 hours updating a spreadsheet. That's what I want to know. And then from there, I can really work backwards and start to uncover the narrative. The second part of it, too, though, is I like to talk to customers regardless. Even if they're totally bought in on the philosophy, they might even have the right narrative. I like to talk to customers directly as a marketer because it's going to help me understand if the vision of the organization is in alignment with what the customer experience is. Or is this vision aspirational or are there gaps? And that's really important, especially in the early stages. So in terms of combating that question, those are usually the bullet points that I go through with people is I want to understand where they are from a mental state of like what their organization does. And then very quickly want to get in front of customers.
how do you think through what that actually looks like in their marketing? Because it's one thing to say we need to tell a story on our
Yeah.
landing page or on our emails or whatever wherever it is. where how does the story actually come across on like a homepage, for example? What does it look like when companies are doing that well?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I think the answer that a lot of business owners don't want to hear is that it requires a lot of work up front, which means if you're going to hire a marketer and you want them to really uncover, identify, and create a consistent message across all channels, whether it be digital, print, television, radio, whatever it may be, you have to do the work up front. And that's going to take some time. Now, there are amazing tools that could help make that time, that can shorten that time, but making sure that all the elements are in place and it's a clear, easy to understand template, if you will, for not just marketing, but sales, HR, customer success, etc., to be able to reference that information and then execute and distribute messaging across multiple channels in the right voice. That's where you start to see that come to light. What is missing more often than not is just kind of like assumption that, oh well, I'm the CEO, I know what my company does. Messaging is kind of not super like interesting to me or relevant. I'm more focused on action. I want to get things done. I want to just do it. And that's, I get it. All right. So I think us marketers get this challenge a lot because we might push back and say, okay, cool. Like give me 18 hours to work on this document. And they're going to say, I don't want you to spend 18 hours to create a document because that document isn't going to give me any action. And I push back on that. And look, we can focus on some quick wins in the interim if that really gives you that level of comfort. But that 18 hours is going to pan out and help for months, years, etc. And then now you have something that you can tweak and adjust to when you hire someone to come on board and they can read through this document and use it as a reference material. And it sets the right stage when you're doing your quarterly reviews to the board and you want to know, like, what is our brand messaging? What is our mission? What are our values? How are we supposed to say this? Hey, the CEO has one way of saying this, whereas the brand has a very different perspective. Maybe it's a different tone entirely. If that's assumed or unshared in a very clear format, it's going to lead to more meetings, more problems, more discussions, more Slack messages, etc. And that's going to end up taking way more time than that initial upfront work of just getting it on paper in the first place. So then you have a foundational document to use and utilize going forward for any messaging on any platform.
On that doc specifically, or maybe just at a broader scale, I guess,
Yeah.
if you're thinking through how you've kind of touched on this a little bit, but how you actually come to what that story should be, um,
Mm,
holistically, and then all the little elements, like how do you make that decision if, let's say, your company, you're a software company and you have like three different potential stories of success you could share.
mm.
How do you think through which one to really focus in on, and what the elements that trickle off of that are?
To answer your question, let me provide you an example of a fairly new organization that I think has executed this very well, and that would be Comsor. They actually have two completely separate products, Matcha and Bronto. Bronto is more of a professional Rolodex, if you will, whereas Matcha is an actual system, a network that is designed to match likely candidates together to help improve their own network, etc. From a broad scope, Comsor, the umbrella of Comsor, is the entity, and they happen to have two different products that can help facilitate what networking or go to network means to you. If you are looking to, you know, you could use Bronto for one. Maybe you're a freelancer and you want to meet new people. Maybe Matcha is a better case for you. All of that, right? But Comsor, if you take a look at how they distribute their tone, etc. It's really interesting. And they have a very, very clear personality on LinkedIn in particular. And that varies slightly with Melissa and Mac, the two co-founders. They both have different languages, but it's still consistent enough. So it's very clear to me that they've done the work And they know the difference between when ComSource says something versus when Max says something versus when Melissa says something. And then even like when Matcha talks about something or Bronto talks about something, they're all connected. There's this similar, like, and I would use I think the easiest explanation or adjective, if you will, is it's like a cool knowledge person. Like I think that's how I would just like if I was to give a descriptor, they're like millennial, smart millennial, or something of that nature. I think I would use to describe that. And they support it and they back it up with a lot of information. And I love that strategy quite a bit. I think that they've done a very good job of understanding where they fit in that hierarchy. And I think and here's why it's important though, because if Mac was so different and so off the rails from what ComSor represents, that would be confusing and would be even further confusing because they have multiple products.
Yeah, that makes sense. That's a great example. And diving deeper into the story itself, assuming it's just let's just say we're working with a company that has one product, one story,
Yeah.
so it's a little crisper.
Yeah.
Um, if you had to break down what makes that actually compelling, though, you've talked about how you want to talk about the transformation that it can make.
Yeah.
That's one core piece. What are the other elements of a compelling brand story that if you see it on a page or in an email, you just instantly know they've thought about storytelling. They have this all button. Like, what are those elements that make that clear?
Yeah. In terms of the elements, I think it may sound um not very tangible, but truly, if you can tell when an organization has spent the time to understand what their mission, vision, and statement is. And then when I say that, that mission, vision, and statement cascades and can be directly mapped to virtually any digital asset you see, to the point where it is unmistakingly recognizable on one from a visual standpoint, but then also from a language standpoint as well. Probably a great organization that has done this very well is Gong. And I would argue that Gong has done an amazing job when Udi was posting, um, when Devin Reed was posting while he was still at Gong, you knew that it was a Gong type of storyline, right? Now they were their own people, their own personalities, but then Gong would post too, and it was very very connected, if you will. And it's unquestionable to me that they had a very clear understanding that at the end of the day, if they were to look back on an entire 365 days of doing stuff, that they could directly map everything that they did to back to their mission and vision and goals. So if you can do that, and it sounds really simple, but it's massively difficult to do. And that's where creating documentation as guides, templates, etc., can just take that to another height and simplify it for the entire organization, especially these growing organizations that are like, hey, one of their OKRs for HR is to hire 300 new sales reps. Those sales reps need templates. Those reps need pitch decks. Those sales reps need assets, and they all need to share similarities. And then they, as human beings that are also going to be out there doing any kind of social selling, et cetera, email nurturing, whatever that is that they're doing, they need those templates too, so that they can, at the very least, insert their personality, which is probably why they were hired in the first place, into the ethos of what that organization represents and stands for. And in its simplest form, the mission and vision statements will accomplish that.
I love it. Yeah. I want to talk about your freelance experience and
Yeah,
transitioning between these two topics. I'm actually curious to hear on the fractional side of things, whenever you're doing a freelance one-off project
yeah,
or an ongoing project, whatever it may be, how do you tell your story to get in front of clients as a freelancer? So how do you apply
yeah.
all this that you've talked about for other people? How have you applied this to yourself?
I love this question. Thank you. Yeah, the what I like to say is, hey, I've been fortunate enough to be in the B2B space for over 20 years. And I've worn arguably too many hats. But from that experience, whether I was sitting in a leadership meeting, doing marketing, focused on customer success, etc., I have become an incredibly well-rounded marketing generalist. And I have a very clear understanding of what business success looks like. I am not someone that you would hire and put into one specific box that needs to get checked, right? I would probably flounder and not do a great job for you. If you need someone that can be strategic, can roll up their sleeves, dive in but also understand the net positive that will come from it is that you're asking me to do, that's where I'm going to create a better product in the long run or a better outcome because I'm not just going to say, oh, you need a pitch deck. Let me just create a pitch deck. I'm going to understand that the pitch deck that I'm creating is going to help, a team of 20 SDRs potentially, pay their mortgage or, go on that vacation or get that promotion or help the organization get that Series B that they were going after. Those types of things, like I understand that world on a very deep level, and that helps me produce content, marketing strategies, etc., from a different lens than someone that's very focused on tactical, whatever you asking of me.
As in your experience freelancing fractional,
Hmm.
this will be our last question, then we'll wrap up here. Why is freelancing or doing fractional work for companies an attractive option for marketers increasingly? It seems like more and more people are making that leap. Why have
Yeah,
you made that leap? Or whether it's as a side thing or full time thing, why make that leap? What's attractive about that?
another great question. Simply put, um, marketers' shelf life is there's a very thin line for a marketer to stay at one organization for the foreseeable future for many reasons. But for the most part, it's usually because there is not a lot of clarity in terms of the value of why marketing needs to be in house. And a lot of organizations, especially those that are in like the smaller startup world or growing, they're very focused on action. And it goes back to what I was initially saying about why story is so important. A lot of folks are like, I need more revenue, I need more leads, I need more, blah, 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 blah. And that's it. Right. And so when you hire a marketer to come in, it's expensive. There's a lot of onboarding, and it feels like you're doing a lot of things without a lot of output, especially if you're driven by very clear metrics and don't entirely value marketing in the first place. So so that's the world. There's a lot of that out there, right? Um, the other part of it too, quite frankly, is so many organizations are kind of unicorn hunting. And they have this idea that, I need someone that has been working in Facebook since 1847, or I need someone that has, expertise in this proprietary system that I just created. And so like there's a lot of that floating around too, which makes it challenging for marketers to find a good fit because of like what organizations think they need. The barrier to entry, the risk, all of those things diminish dramatically in the freelance space. And I'm not talking about agency. Agency is kind of like, I don't know, I would argue the agencies are kind of in trouble because a lot of them are very like stuck in their ways. They have their templates and they haven't updated them, and they're kind of getting pushed out of the way. Whereas freelancers are adapting, they're learning, and at the end of the day, it is it's easier to stomach a, le- it, it's easier to stomach for me to say, I'm happy to charge you less for my time, knowing that I have a very clear understanding of what you're looking for, and you're okay that I'm also working 3 other opportunities at the same time. And I flip that around, organizations have a much, much better appetite knowing I don't need to go through the onboarding process. I don't need to go through going through the benefits and everything that has to go there. I don't need to invest in annual salary. I can work with you on a month to month basis. And if it doesn't work, worst case scenario, I had something versus nothing, right? Versus waiting 90 days to find out if it's going to work or not. So all of that combined, I think, is why freelancing is really taking off.
Love it. Jason, thanks so much for hopping on. I do want to give you a chance as we wrap up here to let the audience know what you're focused on right now and where they can find you.
Yeah, two things. So you can find me on on LinkedIn. I try to be pretty vocal. I have a lot of fun there. I occasionally will interview my dog and talk to him about marketing. I'm also you can find me at jasonettermarketing.com. And then last but not least, if you work with the incredible organization called Marketer Hire, you can probably find me